Welcome back. This is Michael Brooks with a special Michael Brooks Show / Majority Report podcast, YouTube exclusive, yes, with Senator Kevin De León. He was the former president pro tempore of the California State Senate, and he is now challenging Dianne Feinstein to serve in the United States Senate representing California. Senator, thanks so much for being here.
Hey, Michael, thanks a lot. I appreciate you having me on.
Senator, one of the things that has struck us about your campaign so far is you've had a very clear and unequivocal message on healthcare, on single-payer healthcare specifically. A lot of people who watch and listen to this show view Medicare for All not only as an urgent moral necessity, but also as kind of in some ways, a social advancement which could have a ripple effect on many other areas, including supporting union organizing and other sort of ways of addressing inequality. And I'm curious your position, first of all, both as a state senator with regards to the bill that was debated in California, whether you support Senator Sanders' legislation in the U.S. Senate, and how you see that broader implications of the fight for single-payer health care.
Well, I'd say, Michael, a couple things. One is that the answer is yes, unequivocally. I support Medicare for All. I know that is Senator Bernie Sanders' proposal, a Senate bill that is before the Congress, and I do support it. There's a couple of reasons why. Number one, if you start with the notion that healthcare is a universal right and not the exclusive precondition of the wealthy or the elite, then I think that Medicare for All or single payer, whatever universal healthcare system, and there are numerous out there globally to choose from, and a model after that you believe that healthcare should be accessible to all individuals, regardless of who you are and regardless of your socioeconomic status. We know that healthcare bankruptcies are on the rise. The fear of going to an emergency room because you know that you may not be able to make the payments, afford it, should not happen in the wealthiest nation in the world. In fact, as the wealthiest nation in the world, the fact that our health outcomes and cost containments are completely out of balance means that we need some very serious healthcare reform. And I think this cuts across, all political parties, ideologies, that anyone would want access to affordable healthcare. And that's why I'm a strong and firm believer of Medicare for All.
Do you see a tension? Because I understand what you're saying, and I think that is clear. You'll co-sign onto Bernie Sanders' bill. Republicans have been using the language of access, and in some ways it's kind of like, the notion, I guess, that you could theoretically have access to anything if you could afford it. I mean, we know that people like Paul Ryan are obviously not talking about the universal delivery you're talking about. And I'm just wondering, do you kind of anticipate the political battle around sort of the language of how healthcare programs are sort of accessible, and why the needs of healthcare for all are universal and bipartisan, but there is clear, it seems to me, ideological disagreement right now between, not just Democrats and Republicans, but really left and progressive Democrats and Democrats maybe still more sort of beholden to insurance industry, as an example.
Well, let me say this, is that unfortunately in America, healthcare has become politicized. It's highly politicized, unlike any other nation in the entire world. If you go to Japan, they've had a universal healthcare system since the early 70s, and they are the third largest economy in the world. What has happened in the United States is healthcare, as opposed to being focused on cost containment, on the cost of pharmaceutical drugs that we need to be better or to live longer or stay alive, contain healthcare costs. what we've done is we've politicized it, and it's on the spectrum between the left and the right. And what you're referring to in terms of messaging and how it resonates, with everyday Americans across the country is quite extraordinary. Whether people believe in expansion of accessibility to healthcare through the ACA, or Obamacare, what is quite fascinating to me, and it's not universal healthcare, but let's use that as an example. If you tell Trump supporter, or if you ask Trump supporter if they support the ACA, quantitatively, through surveys, through polling, they come back universally in support of the ACA and the ideas and concepts and principles of having access to quality health care. If you use the word Obamacare, then they overwhelmingly oppose Obamacare, ACA. And it's the wording, it's the messaging that's become highly politicized. In some cases, with regards to Obamacare, obviously it's become racialized. But
right.
Having access to universal health care doesn't make a difference if you're from the Appalachia region, or West Virginia or Virginia. To me, it doesn't make a difference if you are from the Panhandle of Florida, or if you're from Kentucky or Tennessee, or if you're from California on the Central Coast, the Bay Area, Los Angeles, or Central Valley. Healthcare is healthcare, and it's a universal right. Whether you're on the right, whether you're on the left, whether you're points in between, whether you're agnostic to politics altogether. You don't want to live in fear that you're going to be bankrupted because your child had an asthmatic attack, and you had to take your child to the emergency room, and you lost a day's pay from work because you had to spend a whole day with your child in the emergency room, and you lose your ability to pay your rent to put a roof over your family's head because of health care, because your child, is prone to asthma, because you live in a neighborhood that is has poor air quality, because there are, chrome plating facilities near your home or near your school, and that aggravates, your child's breathing patterns. This is what happens to poor people. And then again, it doesn't make a difference if you're poor, Democrat, or if you're a Trump supporter and you're poor. Access to universal health care should not be politicized.
Right. So, and I'm sure that saying full universal government coverage is also a very simple and clean way of talking about it and presenting it to the public. Let's talk about immigration. This administration has targeted immigrant communities. They've ramped up ICE raids and enforcement. I want to play a bit of sound, Senator, because I think also the rhetoric about this matters as well. And I'm sure that, sort of questionable rhetoric about immigration is increased and amplified by Trump, but it's not new to him. This is some sound from a 1994 debate of your opponent talking about Dianne Feinstein, the incumbent senator, talking about immigration at the time. And I just want, maybe you could comment on how she framed it at the time and speak to your efforts in California to fight the Trump administration on these issues.
I think we can enforce our borders. I think we should enforce our borders. To have a situation where 40% of the babies born on Medicaid in California today are born of illegal immigrants creates a very real problem for the state, which is in deficit.
Look, of course you can enforce the borders.
Let me finish.
I agree.
To have 17% of our prison population at a cost of $300 million a year be illegal immigrants who come here and commit felonies. That's not what this nation is all about.
I'd like you to respond to that and talk about the Trump administration as well.
Well, we've come full circle. Obviously, back in 1994, we had a very polarizing ballot initiative before the voters in California, Proposition 187, which sought to bar young children from elementary schools and receiving health care in California. And obviously, Senator Feinstein was up for re-election against a Republican, Michael Huffington. It's interesting how it's become full circle with Donald Trump today, and with his calls for a border wall, and now my attempt to be a new voice for California for 2018. I can tell you this, is that during these very difficult moments, it is never a right thing to do to pit one group against another. to scapegoat vulnerable immigrants for all these socioeconomic and political ills of our country. I think politicians, whether you're on the left or the right, to me, doesn't make a difference. I think that the expectation is you move policies, economic policies that improve the human condition for all individuals, that you lift them up. You don't pit one group against another for political expediency. Obviously, I don't like the rhetoric that is happening today. I didn't like the rhetoric that was happening back in 1994. And I was appalled when I heard the comments from Senator Feinstein back then, and I'm still appalled because it still resonates. It cuts deep because it's personal. Coming from a family of immigrants, being the youngest child of a single immigrant mother with a third-grade education. I mean, it's sort of deja vu of what we're witnessing today. And in the body politic in America, because it happened first in California, and I can tell you it doesn't end up well, for the future. And I did not like the comments that Senator Feinstein made then. I don't like them today. I don't think it's a reflection of the values, and it's a recognition of the incredible diversity that we have in California today.
What are some steps? I mean, California has made a national name, obviously, in terms of the conflicts between the Sessions Justice Department, the Trump administration, and efforts that you and the governor and activists have made in contrast to the immigration policies nationally. I'd like you to get into a bit of those specifically. And then as a second part to the question, if you're elected to the United States Senate and have an opportunity to push policy on a national level, I know a lot of people working on these issues as attorneys, as activists on the grassroots level, they do think that ICE is fundamentally unreformable. It should be abolished as an agency or phased out. So I'd like you to speak to that as well.
Well, a couple of things. One is that, a few weeks ago, I was insulted that the Attorney General of the United States, Jeff Sessions, came to my home state to announce the Department of Justice lawsuit against my bill that I wrote, Senate Bill 54, the California Values Act, also known as the Sanctuary State Bill. Mm-hmm. And the reason why I wrote the California Values Act, the Sanctuary State Bill, was very clear that both Sessions as well as Trump were looking to create the opportunity for mass deportations. Now, I thought with his hardened rhetoric that he would focus on criminal violent felons, on gang members, but that hasn't happened. His focus has been on mothers, fathers with children, separating children from their mothers and fathers, from women who are seeking temporary restraining orders, fleeing domestic violence, a woman who's pulled out of a hospital receiving cancer treatment. This is the kind of deportations that this administration is looking to accomplish in California and elsewhere. So that's why I moved with my measure, Senate Bill 54. And I can tell you this, Michael, that I feel very confident that we will prevail in the court of law, because I wrote this with close consultation with the 82nd Attorney General of the U.S., Eric Holder. Mm-hmm. And we feel confident that we're on solid legal ground because we're not interfering with immigration policy. All we're saying is this. Federal immigration authorities have exclusive jurisdiction of enforcing federal immigration laws. That's statutory in nature. That's the Congress. And then it's the executive branch enforcing those laws. But a state like California and other states throughout the country don't have to lift a single finger or spend a single cent to separate innocent mothers from their children and children from their fathers. Now, when we're talking about hardened criminal violent felons and we're talking about MS-13 gang members, there can be collaboration and cooperation, and there should be local law enforcement and the federal authorities. But not when we're talking about, innocent folks who contribute greatly to our economy, to our culture here in California. Today, we're the sixth largest economy in the world, and we accept immigrants from every corner of the world who obey our laws, who pledge allegiance to the red, white, and blue. We do believe they should become Americans eventually, but the reality is this. You have a Congress in Washington, D.C. for decades that have not been able to or not have wanted to move forward a comprehensive immigration plan. So I think this is a reflection of the deep dysfunction of Washington, D.C., to be very clear. And that's why you have different states throughout the country moving their own policies as it relates to immigrants, whether it is Arizona or Alabama, who are going in a very different direction than California, or it's a state like California that says we're going to protect hardworking mothers and fathers who contribute greatly to our economy and who have helped made us the sixth largest economy in the world. So that's why with Trump using immigrants as a scapegoat, as a divisive wedge to tear at the fabric of who we are as a great nation, we have to do everything within our power to stand up and give them a voice. On the question with regards to abolishing ICE, let me say this, is that I think that every nation in the world has a right to protect their own sovereignty, including the United States. And they have a right to have strong borders. There's no question about it. The construction of a physical border on the wall, to me, is ridiculous. It's a stupid idea, because you're spending tens of billions of dollars of taxpayers, American taxpayers' dollars, that is not going to solve this issue. Quite frankly, who wonders, if these are friends, cronies of Donald Trump who are going to reap incredible financial rewards and benefits from being contractors to build this wall that he's so fixated on. That doesn't resolve the situation, doesn't make us safer, doesn't bring jobs back to America, doesn't grow our economy. So I think that every nation has a right to protect its own sovereignty. I do believe that there are very rogue elements within ICE. I think you're starting at the top with the interim director, the rabid attack dog that Thomas Holman is, who has become a very mean-spirited, head of ICE. And this is an agency that, quite frankly, has been highly politicized, both by the Secretary of Homeland Security, as well as the Attorney General, and ultimately with the President of the United States. But I want to just stop short of saying you abolish.
Okay. Yeah, just to be clear about that. So you don't, because I think from a, there's no question, objectively and empirically, that things have gotten significantly worse under Trump, but there's still a lot of objections to kind of, ICE policy under the Obama administration as well. And I guess, I don't think anybody would question that. Obviously, there's a sense of course, monitoring borders and deciding who comes in, and, and certainly, thinking about crime and security and things like that. But there is a sense among some that ICE has, it's a feature, not a bug, of that particular agency. But you wouldn't go with that. You wouldn't go along with abolishing it.
No, I wouldn't. But, the concerns are genuine and they're real. Whether ICE has become, an extension of the Trump deportation machine, and they have gone rogue. And obviously, instead of focusing on hardened, violent criminal felons, they're focusing on everyday folks and trying to terrorize, communities by instilling fear throughout, states like California that rejected Trump by a margin of 2-1, because we rejected the politics fueled by resentment, by misogyny, as well as bigotry. So it's very clear that both Trump as well as Sessions has California in the crosshairs, and they're trying to do everything within their power to undermine our economic security, our progressive values, as well as our people with these stepped-up deportations. I think that the agency should stay intact until, hopefully, knock on wood, there's a Democratic president can bring the necessary reforms that agency needs. They have a rogue director that has highly politicized it because of this administration, and there needs to be some very serious internal reforms.
Let's move to foreign policy in the last couple of minutes, Senator. Briefly, we'll get to current issues in a moment, but it's worth noting that a couple of days ago, or just this past week, was the 15th anniversary of the invasion of Iraq. Senator Feinstein voted for it, and some of us, particularly those of us who were not even of voting age yet when that happened, this was a very formidable event in our lives and our sense of it just kind of an abuse of power, essentially, and a real, not just a blunder or a mistake, but a truly catastrophic, unethical thing. I just, where were you at the time? Did you oppose the invasion? How do you see it?
No, I oppose. Obviously, I didn't have statutorily.
Right, course,
I didn't have a vote,
right,
directly impacting the decision making with regards to going to war, both in Afghanistan as well as Iraq. But to use two words that you just articulated, catastrophic and unethical, I think the votes that were made on behalf of Californians were both catastrophic and unethical, that Senator Feinstein did back in the day. You have two wars, both Iran as well as, I should say, Iraq and Afghanistan. And these wars have been running, 15 years and 17 years, longer than the Vietnam War, to put this in context. They have cost us countless American lives. Many Americans have come back home, traumatized, physically disabled, with very deep psychological issues, because war is hell. And it is not a pretty picture when you actually go there physically and you confront the reality. Plus, we have spent not one, not two, not three, not four, but $5 trillion in both wars, Iraq as well as Afghanistan. And that's $5 trillion that we could have spent, we should have spent, on the issue of healthcare, on the issue of debt-free college, on the issue of clean energy and demanding freedom from fossil fuel dependency, on the issue of investing in healthcare, more specifically with regards to precision medicine and finding a cure for Parkinson's disease or Alzheimer's. So the votes that you make in terms of the war, Iraq and Afghanistan, are very consequential because of the resources that have been spent. And by the way, these are taxpayer dollars that the millennials will be saddled with the debt because we're paying it as a credit card, both principal as well as interest. And we haven't gotten nowhere with both of these wars.
Yeah.
What was the objective? I don't think the objective was ever met.
Right. And obviously,
the objectives have not been met. We're still there. We still have Americans there. Again, countless lives. And those votes are not a reflection of a state like California. And that's not something I would have done, back in the day, clearly.
Just want to run through just three very quick foreign policy items, and they're complicated, but I'll make them as narrow as possible, and then you can.
Well, I'll try my best.
Of course. Would you sign on to the Bernie Sanders, Mike Lee, Chris Murphy bill on pulling back U.S. support for the Saudi UAE mission in Yemen?
I'm not familiar with the particular details of this Senate resolution by Merkley from Oregon and Sanders. I will say this, is that I've always been highly concerned about the Saudis, because I think the Saudis, with their money, their fossil fuel money, and the kingdom, they have exported a very extreme right-wing form of Wahhabism throughout the region that have helped create these terrorist cells. I find it quite perverse and ironic that we have stayed so close with the Saudis, while at the same time, to alleviate the internal pressures from within their kingdom, they export that form of extreme Wahhabism and the money to other parts of the Middle East and Afghanistan. So the relationship that we have with the Saudis, I think, has been quite perverse, and it should have been it needs to be re-examined, because I don't think it's helped American interests, and I think it's actually helped destabilize the region even more so.
All right, just one final question on foreign policy. There's, I think, a very strong appetite, particularly to the types of people that you want to reach, younger voters, more progressive voters, and the message that you have particularly talking about foreign policy and sort of rebalancing some of our efforts. There's a very strong desire among particularly younger progressive voters, I think, for maybe a more balanced approach to Israel-Palestine. And I'm just wondering, like, how you view that issue. I don't think anybody would question, obviously, opposition to things like, terrorism, the right and security of all, citizens in Israel. I think those things are clear. They're not disputed. But I think what is disputed, and a difference between obviously Obama and Trump as well, is the extent to which U.S. foreign policy can be exerted to actually get some real groundwork for human rights and concessions for the Palestinians as well. And it's also a strong concern of younger activists. And I'm just curious your thoughts on that as well.
Well, I can tell you this, Michael. I've had the opportunity to go to the region and visit Israel, and not necessarily go into the Gaza Strip, but get as close as they would allow me to get to the Gaza Strip. And I do believe we have to rebalance our foreign policy, less military force and more diplomatic skills, because we don't want to be building walls and burning bridges, which would only make America more isolated and weak. What I do believe is in a two-nation state. I do believe that Israel and the state of Palestine can coexist with each other. This is not a military solution. It is a political solution, which means that very difficult decisions have to be made, both with the Palestinian Authority as well as the Knesset, the electeds in the Knesset, as well as the Prime Minister of Israel. You're going to have to make very tough political decisions. The Palestinians, through self-determination, economic determination, deserve, to live in economic prosperity, to have their families grow, with real opportunities to succeed. But you can only do so if you have a two-state solution. Short of that, obviously, you have a situation that's, quite frankly, non-sustainable. You can't continue to build more housing, because this is a sabotage, if you will, of any potential peace accords between the Palestinians and the Israelis.
And would you agree with the concerns, voiced by former Israeli prime ministers as well as John Kerry, that as that does constitute a form of an apartheid situation as it continues and has not been reined back, even as we've had a process that has stalled?
And you referred to, Michael, to the expansion of the housing?
Yes, housing settlements, which, Ehud Olmert and Ehud Barak, both Israeli prime ministers, both said, if we don't stop this, it will be an apartheid state. Many argue it already is. And John Kerry also said it's two states or apartheid in 2014.
Well, like I said, a few moments ago, the current situation is simply not sustainable if we want peace in the region between the Palestinian people and the Israeli people. The continued growth of the housing settlements actually is a continued poke in the eye politically at the Palestinians. I mean, you need a restraint, and that has to come on the Israeli side. You can't use the continued growth of housing settlements as a political bargaining chip to ultimately sabotage what may be in the future, hopefully sometime sooner rather than later, a process that delivers, a deal where Palestinians and Israelis can live in peace side by side with each other and mutually prosper economically in the region. With the continued expansion of the housing settlement, it's I think a tactic to sabotage any potential deal between the Palestinian Authority as well as the Israelis, and that's why you need political leadership. This is a political situation, not a military situation. The military situation, you're not going to accomplish anything at the end of the day. It just keeps the status quo intact, which again is unsustainable.
Senator De León, right before we go, we only have a moment left. Just make your sort of final case for why it's time to bring you to the Senate and I guess retire Senator Feinstein.
Well, Michael, I thank you very much for this opportunity to participate in your podcast. And I think that we're long overdue, at least a quarter of a century overdue, to have a debate on the values, on the priorities, and on the issues that we Californians care deeply about. I think these are very perilous times in our nation's history. In fact, they're very dangerous times. And I don't say that with a sense of hyperbole. I think that this president makes Richard Nixon look like a choir boy. And because of that, we need someone on the front lines, not on the sidelines. We need someone with a real strong voice on the issue of health care, on the issue of immigration, on the issue of climate change and clean energy, and providing economic growth, real jobs for Californians, for Americans, that one could put a roof over their child's head and clothes on their backs and food on the table by converting these environmental challenges into economic opportunities. And I think that real leadership, moral clarity, is always doing the right thing, even when no one is watching. So it should never take a primary challenge for California's leadership to do the right thing on a whole variety of issues. And I don't think that the representation that we currently have in Washington is reflective of the diversity and inclusivity of California today. Maybe a quarter of a century ago, but not today. And I think it's time to have change. Change is good, and I hope to be that change for Californians in 2018.
Senator Kevin De León, he's challenging Dianne Feinstein for the United States Senate in California. He's also the president pro tempore emeritus of the California State Senate. Senator, thanks so much for your time. Appreciate it.
It was great. Thanks a lot.